What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
The role of the leader, what you're talking about, you hit on something so important, is that a person needs to understand the value of what they're contributing to
Yes.
the overall process.
Yes.
You know, a lot of times, what's the person's purpose? And, you know, it's like, does somebody have some type of altruistic purpose in life? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about somebody's role in the organization, and it's not just the value that they're getting from personal interaction. What's the value they're giving for contribution? And that's the role of the leaders, to be able to communicate, isn't it? To help somebody understand and be able to tie those things together.
Oh yeah, and it's gonna be, it helps you to kind of see that connection to it. I'm thinking back of a clip, and I've searched for it so many times, and you can't find it on the internet anymore. And I'm so sad about it, because I used to use it as an example. It was this wonderful, regardless of how you feel about the company, it was this wonderful GE ad. And what it was that they were taking the engineers from one of their plants on a bus tour. Now, these engineers were in charge of building MRI machines to the smallest degree. I mean, they're on an assembly line, right? You know, they're doing the smallest little parts of this whole machine. That's the final product of it. And so they take them on this bus trip to this oncology hospital, and they finally get to meet the patients that benefited from the technology, and they're so thankful and so effusive. You can see at that moment, those engineers are like, oh, this is what I do. This is what I do for a living. Isn't that great? You know, and I've heard it in the staffing industry, and that's something we support wholeheartedly at ASA, is finding people a job, giving them those means to succeed in their life. Is there a higher calling than that? I don't know, maybe, but that's the meaning we're talking about. You know, getting people to see that and buy into that so that they can feel fulfilled. And again, as you as a leader, you're going to see the benefits of that, because they're going to produce for you.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's huge it's huge in that area, because what happens is that it's when you're trying to help people get meaning, if you look especially in the staffing industry, is that they're when you stop and think about it, people are not supposed to get their self-worth out of what they do. I mean, psychologists tell us that, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? You know, as human beings, unfortunately, we get our sense of self-worth out of what we do. And so for a leader to be able to come alongside and be able to operate from a communication standpoint, and to be able to help somebody focus on this, you talked about empathy, right? As a muscle that needs to be, and I think that most leaders, empathy is something that is part of their toolbox. You know, they know that. But is there something else that you've observed that is important for a leader to be able to possess, to be able to develop a development program, not just a training program?
A development program. You know, the other ones I think really in their key are being able to analyze and figure out. You mentioned, I think a little bit earlier, those gaps, right? You know, that gap analysis is where it's at, of looking at your staff and seeing where those deficiencies are. It used to be, and I've seen it, I've coached and worked with several leaders over it, you know, this old mentality of, and it's frankly true. Let's just call it what it is. I was the most technically gifted and successful at my job, and therefore I became a supervisor, and I was good at that. And then I became a leader, right? Through technical prowess and through doing what I need to do. It's harder to look back on your career and say, well, what were those gaps? What are those things that made me successful, and apply those to others? And a lot of times what we see is leaders trying to make other people into themselves, right? You know, by saying, you know, classic example, I won't name it. I told you who I've worked for before, but I remember this leadership development, not a leadership. This was a actual legal writing program that I was in charge of developing. And I remember we went to them and we asked the senior leadership, is this a training problem? And they're like, of course it is. You know, people need to learn how to write. We have all these errors in ours, and we always are sending back corrections and drafts. But you know what? When I weeded into it more and more, it was people not correcting things that were necessarily needed to be corrected. It was all style corrections. And so basically what we found were the leaders wanted the other people to write exactly like them. They wanted to make writers that wrote exactly. And I was like, that's impossible, because we all have slightly different styles. But you can have a style guide, but enforcing it down to that level. And then when I interviewed the staff, and this is the funniest part about it, I was like, what's going on here? What skills do you need? They're like, well, frankly, we don't put a lot of work into our writing anymore because we know our supervisor is going to rewrite it anyway. And I was like, fair enough. Fair enough. So again, no incentive. So in those cases, if the leaders could have taken a look at their writing and really assessed what the need was, the need was really tiny. It was structural. There were some structural needs that were there, and that's what I came in and really identified. As my part of the training developing person there, is saying, okay, because typically, when you go in and ask, it's Mike, you understand this. If you go into and you're interviewing a client, for a training product, and they say, well, what issues you're having? Like, well, we're horrible at communication. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? I'm horrible at communication. But asking the questions like why, what, how, that the analysis part of it, that's a skill that the leaders can get in there and say, okay, my people are really struggling with sales. We haven't closed, in this last week, and all these requisitions are left on the table. And just saying, well, instead of saying we're poor at sales, that's easy. Yeah, no duh. You see that. But going in there and saying, okay, how are we approaching this, guys? What are you doing? And asking them, like, well, here's what we're doing. And then maybe identifying the little smaller parts of that and saying, oh, I identified that. And not necessarily after that point, you might not be the person to fix it. And that's, I think, is really hard for leaders, to put your ego aside and saying, maybe I'm not the one for this. That's when you go outside, you look for experts. Again, that connectional intelligence is saying there might be somebody who's an expert in that can help you and help your staff in that area. Where, I hope it's not controversial for me to say, when I first came to the staffing industry, I think I heard a lot from people, and I've only been here for 4 years, so keep this in mind, that we didn't want a lot of people from within the industry learning with each other, or sharing their experiences with each other, because of this feeling like, oh, they're going to recruit each other, and we're gonna, and it's like, but what you're doing is you're putting a cap on knowledge, on industry knowledge that way, because some people know more and are better at things, and their skills are different. So going, to summarize that whole idea, I think another key skill that leaders really have to adapt is that ability to analyze, ask questions, have the consultant sort of mindset to these problems, and then be able to connect them with solutions. It's easier said than done. I make it sound simple.
But here's, I think the magic of what you're sharing here, Dustin. I think the simplicity comes in is changing the mindset of the leader from being the fix-it person.
Yes.
Right. I was about to say guy, but I'm trying to clean up my language. The fix-it person.
Yeah.
But shifting for that, and I love this idea of a leader being literally a consultant in the process. Be able to go and like I said, remove the obstacles, uncover the issue, because the biggest mistake I know that I've made over the years, and I'm trying to change that, is for me to go to you as somebody that I'm on my team that I'm leading and ask you, okay, Dustin, what do you need? How can I help you? And the reason why is that if you knew the answer to that question, you'd either figure it out yourself, you'd fix it, you'd do what have you. My role is to come alongside you and ask questions to help you uncover the issues of what's going on, and which means that by doing so, I'm helping you learn to think, not just learn to do.
Right. Exactly.
But it's the ability to come along, and because we have to recognize the people that work with us, we have to have enough dialogue going on to uncover the root of the problem, not the superficial Band-Aid that might be on top. Exactly. And the second point that you made in here, and I want you to expound on this, is what I'm hearing you say is if I come in with questions, I'm giving the people who work with me a voice. Right. And I've talked about, that's an important aspect of leadership, isn't it?
It's becoming more and more important. I'm actually going to be speaking on this next week, so this is good timing. We know there's some trends in it. I could cite the research and everything. We know there's some trends just basically in society. One of those trends that I often refer back to is mistrust of institutions, right? And you know that we'd like to believe as organizations that we're not that. We're not the face. We're not them, right? That's not the case. You can't help being them. When you bring on a person, when you hire them on, you are automatically them. And what you have to display to them is that you share their values, right? That you are going to meet them halfway in that. And that's hard because that traditional sort of hierarchical management, dictates that there's a process for this, right? It's handed down. And so participatory management, getting your people involved, hearing their voices is becoming more and more important. Another thing that we know about generational studies, and I'm not a big proponent of generational studies, but we do know based on historical trends, there are some impacts, certainly from historical events and other things that impact different generations differently. And what we've certainly
that as a latchkey kids, right? That
yeah,
whole generation, that's a generational reality.
I was one of those, so I'm certainly, I can't deny how I developed because of that. And for these younger generations, it's this very much idea that, going back to the idea of the institutions, the ones they do trust. I think you mentioned it. We had been talking about it earlier. Demonstrate accountability, demonstrate openness, honesty, are genuine, very genuine leadership. Can admit when they make a mistake. Early story, something impacted me early in my career. I remember I was leading, and this was what a leader told me, and I won't name that leader. I had ran a program, and I did not know that this trainer was going to bring a video clip with them. Now, I worked in government, and so anything that is part of a training is FOIAble. The public can FOIA that, and so I was working for a fairly political agency. And the video that this trainer showed in the middle of this training had a very clear bias and we were FOIA'd because of it. It was my mistake. I should have vetted everything. I was young, it was right. And I apologized to show accountability. And this one senior leader, he told me, he's like, don't ever apologize. It'll be weakness. They'll see it as weakness and you'll be blamed for everything. And I was like, I'm sorry, I just can't agree with that. I messed up and I'm going to learn from this experience and I'm not going to repeat that. But to lie about it and say that I had no role in this, no, I'm not going to do that. But that was a mindset. I thought about it and I tried to empathize with him. I was like, where did he develop that mindset from? And that was that traditional sort of power-based hierarchical sort of system of things of doing that. He's right. He would have had to protect himself in the past because that would have been viewed as an egregious error. And, he doesn't want to seem powerless in that sort of situation. So, it's adapting to that newer mindset, and it's hard. I'm going to be honest, I'm not a young guy either. So adapting to some of these new mindsets is difficult for me. But as the population goes, so must I as a leader.
Yeah, very much so. But let's talk about, since you brought up vulnerability, if you're looking at putting a development program together, why that's important, because you want to create a culture where people, Patrick Lencioni in his model, 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team, talks about the base level is called vulnerability-based trust.
Yes.
And the definition of trust is safety, right? You want people to feel safe coming and admitting a mistake. You want people to feel safe falling and getting back up on their feet.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a key aspect of it. And here's what as you were talking about this example, what was erroneous about the older model, which is don't admit your mistakes because it's a weakness. The sad part about it was the people who work for us as leaders, people are part of our team, right? If we make a mistake, guess what? They know we made the mistake. Okay, we can't hide it from them.
They might not tell us that,
but they know it. They're talking to each other about it, right?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
So how much more strength? And one of my early leaders taught me this. He said, Mike, only the powerful can be vulnerable, right? Only powerful. And so he said, if you lay it out there, if you lay it out in front of people, and you have dialogue and you use it a learning opportunity for everyone, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of culture.
Yeah. And that's the sort of culture you really, I love the Lencioni model too. Another favorite one trust-based model that I have is the Covey. one that kind of lays it out. And a lot of times in the Covey model, the top two parts of it, I've seen it laid out like a tree, are often those competence and results levels. And that's where a lot of leadership stops at, right?
Right.
They're like, okay, I'm able to do my job and able to do it well, and I get results. Done. Leadership done, right? Trust done. No. Under that surface is kind of the intent, right? And being very clear about your intent, because again, I talked about that inherent trust in the institutions and in us and they, how often does a leader really go out there? And I've experimented with this, and it really does work, of saying, here's what I want done. And I think Simon Sinek, brought this up. Here's what I want done. Here's why it's good for you. Here's the WIFM. And here's my intent for you through developing this project. And here's what I'm going to get out of it. Just being honest about it. It's not just for you. I'm going to get something from this too. And we're all going to grow through this. I can think of an example we did recently. We during a very busy time, we were looking at some strategic initiatives, proposed by our board. And I and our leadership team chose 4 or 5 mid-level leaders in our organization who were already pretty busy. And we asked them to lead, the analysis of these different initiatives. And I got a lot of him and the hawing, Dustin, and I was like, let me be clear with you. We've identified you as potential, high-level leaders. This is an opportunity for you to showcase those skills and or ask me if you need a hand, identify those areas where you're not doing well. And we found a lot of them. And, we did help myself along with our HR director, we dove in there and we helped people. And it was an exercise to develop them. But we were very clear about the intent of that exercise from the very beginning. We weren't going to lie to them and say, I can't even think what we would tell them, honestly. I'm at that point. But, that's the sort of leadership it seems counterintuitive, because you're like, well, I got to hold my cards. I want to lay all my cards out on the table, right? People will know what hand I'm playing with, and they'll know. But in leadership, that instills that sort of trust there. And so for me, that third level, that kind of communicating your intent, is key and often underdone by leadership. And then the bottom level is the integrity level. And if I had to tell you about integrity, this is doing what you say you're going to do. Yeah. It bites leaders all the time. I see it. But, that's just something you got to watch for yourself. So the intent level is, I find, something we could focus more on as leaders. And often I see kind of where they fall short. They think they've communicated everything to their staff, but not really. The staff has this feeling like they're leaving something out. There's something there that I don't understand. There's some ulterior motive, and that's where those really kind of conflicts start brewing, right? Because in the absence of data, we make it up.
That's right. They make up stories, right? And
exactly.
That's it. So what happens? We have to help them control the stories that are going on, and you do that by, you don't have to go and release confidential financial information. We don't have to go down that road, but it has to do with what do they need to know, right? What questions might they have, and get involved with conversations along those lines.
And I hate to bring it back, but that always goes back to empathy too, because if you put yourself in their situation, because you were in their situation, you probably just forgot about it.
Yeah.
What would you want to know?
That's a great question. Then, so as we wrap up, because I knew we needed 4 hours, and but there's something I wanted to ask. I haven't asked you this question. I was part of the process, but I didn't bother asking. I just went and did. But you guys, ASA came up with this a micro-credentialing program or whatever. Tell our listeners just a little bit about the mindset that y'all had of what you try to get leaders, and their teams to do from a development standpoint, because that's the topic we're talking about. This micro-credentialing. Since I experienced that with you, I've seen that pop up in other circumstances. So apparently that's becoming very much in vogue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, most of the trends, this is for people like me out there. I mean, most of the trends we see, even at the university levels, and, as higher education does, usually corporate education follows similarly after that. So what we've seen is them investing heavily in adult education programs, which they are calling micro-professional certifications. Right? You're not your traditional sort of, which I love our CSP, and I'm going to tout it because it is essential, to be able to have the regulatory knowledge of the industry and able to operate. This is more in line with how are you going to actually perform on the job? So
That's
that
operational, very operational.
correct, correct. And so that's where we kind of take a turn and say, okay, what do people need to know to do this particular job right now? What are those skills that fill in the gaps? And certainly beyond the rudimentary levels, because we know everybody has onboarding programs. We know everybody does on-the-job trainings to get the very basics of your job. Typically, you're going to get that within a year if your onboarding program is worth anything. You will get them where they need to be in order to be baseline operational within 6 months to a year, hopefully. Sooner if you can, that'd be great. But after that point, that's when the experience kicks in, right? And how do you develop and gain that experience? Well, you can work a very long time at it. You can work 10, 20 years in the field and finally get there. Or you can rely on experts. You can rely on a community. You can talk to your peers. You can read. You can do all these things to kind of help build in that experience and kind of help expedite it, right? And build those. And that's what we're trying to address with, with these micro-credentials is really those mid-career folks of saying, okay, we understand that you have your baseline. You just need some critical skills in order to achieve higher in those areas. Going back to the leadership one, that's the thing. We're like, we understand you're in this leadership position right now, and it's new to you, and you have all the basics. Clearly, you're successful in what you do, or you wouldn't have been selected as a leader. So how do we fill in those little gaps, and how can we do it in a way that works with your schedule? And by the way, does not only, and I'm not a fan of this, of giving you only one way of doing things, right? I used to train, gosh, I think about how training's changed over the years. When I first got in the classroom, it was all about me as the trainer. I would get in there and lecture, and I would have slides after slides, and I would have exercises that we ran through, but it was really about me saying, I have the knowledge, here you guys go. And the shift has been like, everybody in this room has knowledge. Let's see if we can pull it. I'm directing now as the trainer. I'm like, let's pull it out here. Let's pull it out here. Let's get it out on the floor and discuss these things. But it's hard in the technological world because we all do online learning. We watch videos, we do all that. So the pro stacks are, our effort to try to connect people. There's online, asynchronous, synchronous type learnings that they interact with other people, peer networks, and do all those. So that was really what they were designed to do. And I think also, I think this is the first time I might have said this in public, but my goal, for us at ASA is eventually to develop programs that create a life cycle, an employee life cycle, what I call from hire to retire, a model of learning and development, that a staffing firm could come to ASA, a medium or small size firm that maybe doesn't have a me on staff, and can say, hey, we want to outsource our learning. We want you all to help us and bring it in, and we want to make it right sized for our staff so that we're not interrupting production. We're not doing that. And then that allows your leaders to lead and not have to train and do those things as well. Because I really do think where leaders can do their most impact is not necessarily in the classroom, but it's really what we talked about earlier, is having conversations with their employees and figuring out, where they can add, get rid of those barriers again, where there are gaps that they might need to find a resource for them, what kind of other flexibilities they might need. Gosh, going back to the pandemics part, we talk a lot about readiness in training, right? If a person is not ready to learn, then they're not going to. If they step foot into the classroom and think, well, I'm not going to get anything from this, they won't. It's easy to say. And so, a lot of times employees come to work and do all this, and they're not ready to work. There's a block in them that we as leaders can help eliminate sometimes, or connect them with other people, create employee resource groups, resources for them to, what's the Gallup question that everybody always makes fun about? I have a friend in the workplace, or that. There's a reason for that, right? We can enable those sort of things as leaders. So going back, I know I'm going off topic a little bit, but that's the intent of, like, for the training parts of things, let's let the trainers do those sort of things. Let's right size it. Let's get your people the skills they need. And then you as a leader focus on your leadership qualities and developing yourself. And I think for a leader, that's kind of the smartest way you can go about it right now. And frankly, hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag. Right now is the best time for this, because it used to be that you would as a CLO myself, you would contract for a learning program, and it would be like a 5-day 40 classroom hour learning program, and it would be so super expensive that it would blow your whole learning budget for a year. Now you can piecemeal it and find those resources and do it much more smartly. I put out an article. If you haven't read, if you're a member, if you haven't read the last of our Staffing Success magazine, I actually wrote an article about kind of using your learning and development bucks wisely in doing that kind of learning and design setup. And I kind of outlay it that way. But that certainly, if we're thinking about dollars and cents here, yeah, you can do a lot better and a lot smarter through developing things like these micro learning certificates. Mike, you yourself, you consult, you do these programs, you do them ad hoc, and you can be brought in, at any point to kind of say, okay, I can tag team, or I can laser focus on this one particular subject. And that's a great benefit to firms.
Very
And
much so. Yeah, that's why I love the whole micro-credentialing concept behind this, is that whether you're listening, whether or not you look to ASA for their micro-credentialing, if it's called ProStacks, or there's other issues, other avenues for you to be able to look into. The key part of it that I want our listeners, people who are looking at developing their leadership chops, is to recognize that development is not sending somebody off to school for 2 weeks and then bringing them back to
Not anymore. That's
today's time. That's why it's called micro-credentialing. It's small sections. As leaders, you have to be able to point the light on what your team member. I don't like to use the word employee. Let's call them team member. Your team member, the person working for you should be the person pointing the light on that to help them overcome whatever. Dustin's done a great job talking about obstacles, to be able to step into that space. And the reason for this, when I think about my experience of what ProStacks is doing, is that it's fighting the Ebbinghaus curve.
Oh yeah,
the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. All right, it's that what happens, whatever. And I used to, get a lot of pride in the fact that I'm a pretty good teacher. I'm a trainer. I'm pretty good at it. And then I see this statistic that says no matter what I teach you today, you're going to lose 60 to 80% of it within 24 hours.
Ooh. Yeah, that's the hardest truth you learn in the field, isn't it?
That's it. And so what happens is, though, but if you come back and you touch it 5 times, it reverses all the way up to over 90%. Right. So if you think about this and you think about finding snippets of training that you can put into people and touch and train, and especially with your senior people, the people who have experience, to get them to slow down and figure out, okay, how do I tweak things? How do I, what am I doing? I always love to ask the question, what are you doing good right now? How do you do more of that? And then what do you do better? You're doing something good, but can you do a little bit better? And then you add the new. And I just love this whole part about from a development standpoint.
And then we were talking about the whole, and the number one excuse, I say excuse, and I'm being slightly cynical, I know that, is the time element, right?
Yes.
You can't tell me you don't have 5 minutes to learn one particular skill. You actually need to do what you're doing right now. Yeah, we do it all the time. We go to YouTube now. We're like, oh, how you do this thing? And we go to Chat GPT. How do you do this thing? Micro credentials are another form of that. How do I do this thing? I don't remember. I'm gonna, like you talked about, I'm gonna go back and look at that and just in time it. I love being in the classroom. That was my bread and butter. But I can't be there all the time, and I can't be there right when you need me to be there, right? And so this is the flexibility, and I think, as I talked about Gen Z and Gen A, honestly, this is the way they already operate.
Yeah, that's a culture. As we wrap this thing up, Dustin, it's a cultural issue, right?
Oh, it is. It is.
Can you take and build this is a self-evaluation as I close. It has to do with, is your culture truly a learning culture?
Oh, yes.
Is your culture a development culture? Do people feel like that you have their best interests at heart to be able to help them accomplish what they want to achieve, how do they grow to become who they were intended to be? And so I want to thank you for the time and the focus in the show notes with this. If you have any follow-up questions, we'll have Dustin's email address for you to be able to reach out to him and follow up along those lines then. So
absolutely.
When I look at this, the term servant leadership that you talked about from a standpoint, I want to end with this, mainly to put a little bit more context around it, Dustin. You did a great job of helping us understand what that looks like. It's one of those things that the word quality used to be a big deal, right? Well, then what happens, you so much, it kind of almost lost its meaning, right?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did.
Servant leadership is empathetic leadership.
It is.
It's leadership that focuses on engaging people so they feel a sense of connection to the organization, to their role, and to you as a leader. Right? And that's because in today's marketplace, as you turn this show off, keep this in mind. In today's marketplace, people have a choice on where they work. In other words, they have a choice on who they choose to follow. Hopefully they're choosing you. So, Dustin, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Mike. It's always a pleasure. Hopefully we'll get another chance.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.